I da din die da di da di die die. Di da din die din die. Di da din die di die die. I da din die. Di da di die die. Di 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 di. Hello, everybody. We are back with learning on chapter 38. We're learning the laws of pas akum, chalav akum. What are these things? What do these things mean? What are they? Why would we not have good, delicious bread just because somebody else baked it? We're on the second part of this class, chapter 38, Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, number 3. Oh, and by the way, before I get started, just say one quick thing. Anybody has any questions, so forth, feel free, please, to send them in. Sometimes we can get to those here in the class. The sages didn't prohibit all bread. And again, we're talking about prohibited at the original Gzeira, when it was originally done. Only which was made from the 5 species of grain, i.e. those grains that are usually used for bread, wheat, but people make bread out of barley, oats, spelt, and rye. I like rye bread. Not a big fan of the other ones, but they count. Aval pas kitnios. But let's say you made a bread from legumes. Here we are, today with all this gluten-free sensitivity, and we're making bread back in the ancient days, also gluten-free breads. So, for example, corn, he notes here. Now, of course, corn wasn't an ancient grain, i.e. the time of the Talmud, they weren't doing corn, but by the time the Shulchan Aruch was written, corn was already being grown in Europe. But it is, of course, native to this part of the hemisphere. So if you make bread out of, let's say, rice or corn, and interesting, just as another side note, he calls corn a legume, right? But and that would be the English translation. But kitniot, right, is not a technical term, because legume's an actual scientific name, and I don't believe corn counts as an actual legume. But so we're going to say a kitniot. In other words, if you make bread out of something which is not bread stuff, that's okay. So there's no issue of pas akum there. There's no issue of bread from a non-Jewish baker. And so it's not prohibited under these issues of pas akum or bishul akum. And what's the reason? We're going to get into this idea of oile shulchan melech, something which is fit for the table of a king. What does this mean? So this idea is brought forward that foods that have specific qualities that make them nice, i.e. a nice piece of salmon, not canned salmon, but a nice piece of salmon, but especially a hamburger or some kind of, meat dish, which is fancy. In other words, it has an element of fancy, something you might serve on Shabbos. So these kind of foods are going to, later in the next few, we're going to discuss, have another issue connected, which is called Bishul Yisrael. In other words, even though all the ingredients are kosher, like with pas Yisrael, all the ingredients are kosher, it's a kosher pan, kosher fish, everything, still we're going, the sages, for the prevention of assimilation, enacted certain stringencies around these foods. And so with bread, we have the same thing. Bread, which is made from wheat, that's nice bread, that can sit anywhere, but a bread made out of something inferior, it's not oile shulchan melech, it's not going to be covered in Pas Yisrael or in Bishul Yisrael. Now, today we don't have royal tables. You might say, what does it matter? But i.e., even though we don't have royal tables, we're talking about what would people serve at a nice meal. And that's usually going to be the criteria. Okay, number 4. Pas shepanav tuchim bebeitzim asur. Let's say you've got a bread whose surface is coated with eggs. Okay, so he says it's prohibited in all circumstances. What does this mean? Mishuma beitzim shalav, because of the eggs that are on top of the havelei bishul akum, because then you've got an issue of bread and food cooked by a non-Jew. What about those wafer cakes that are baked on iron griddles, i.e. pancakes? But then they coated the iron with non-kosher fat. Asurim b'chol inyan. Then of course it's forbidden because you've got forbidden food. Mishum b'leil iser. So now what is this next one in 4? So we have to unpack this a little bit. Okay. So he is stringent about bread with an egg coating. Now the question is this a thin egg coating like we do for a challah, or is it something more significant? And we will look at that. The other question is, the Kitzur here makes a distinction, the distinction that he made previously about whether it's cooked by a professional or not, doesn't seem to apply here. And there were certain leniencies which were adopted for bread because it's such a staple, but with regards to other things, it's not. But then, the question is, eggs, today, nobody would consider eggs oile shulchan melech. You wouldn't consider scrambled eggs anything which would be a special issue. So we've got those questions. We've also had this thing. So what about bagels? They're boiled and then cooked, and they're considered laws of of bread. Let's say food cooked for this kind of he mentions a pancake. So pancake has similar ingredients to bread, right? Just it's not, it doesn't rise and it's not kneaded and all these things, but one might think. So the answer is that a pancake is not going to be an issue of food cooked by a non-Jew, but we have to be careful that, of course, everything is kosher. And I guess there was a time when people used to get some kind of pancake and the spirit not kosher fat. And I've probably said this before, but I have to say it. In Poland, where we did so much work, they would make these donuts, pączki, and they would actually serve them in the springtime, right around Fat Tuesday. And but they're available at now. They're really big. Like when we were just there now on our trip, there were new donut places all over. The problem is that in Poland, the traditional way of making donuts is to fry them in pig fat, in schmaltz, pig schmaltz. That's pretty not kosher. Let's say you've got bread, right? The bread, the actual dough, was made by a Jewish person, but then a non-Jewish person cooked the dough. So the sages were more strict here. So then We've got an issue of Bishul Akum on that bread. We've got an issue of food cooked by a non-Jew on that bread, even though the Jew made the dough. Unless the person the Jewish person who made the dough made the oven permitted by throwing a piece of wood in, i.e., right? It's Pas Yisrael too. And so you have to be careful about sending your food to be baked, roasted by bakers who's a non-Jewish. Yisrael, Yishach eitz, to put something in the oven, right? In others, adjust the heat. Or nich Yisrael, it's a pas, or it's a tanur. Okay, so once upon a time, not everybody had ovens at home. So you'd make this dough, but you didn't have an oven where you could properly cook it. So you would send it or carry it to the bakery, and they would bake your bread at the bakery. I mean, it's hard to imagine today, right? But that was a thing, and not everybody had the capacity to bake their own bread at home. Who knows what the reasons were? So now you've got an issue, right? You're bringing your bread to the bakery. So the Kitzur says you should be cautious that if it's a non-Jewish bakery, that somebody that a Jew does something for the oven to make sure that it's Pas Yisrael as well. And then sometimes it would be put on a pan. So it would be taken, there's different kinds of ovens. The traditional oven, it's a stone, like a stone bottom, and the bread cooks on the hot stones. But sometimes they put the bread on a pan, and the pan goes in the oven. So that's also would have the same status. So gets a little complicated. I apologize. So now the leniency which we discussed in our first class on this subject regarding paspalter, the bread cooked by a non-Jewish baker, was because of the great need for bread. And when they tried to prohibit it, it didn't work because people needed bread. So they had to come up with other, scenarios. So now this Sif is dealing with this case where the Jewish person baked the bread and made the dough, and it wouldn't be difficult for them to for the baker to bake it. He's just putting it in the oven, right? There's no real effort involved, right? You just brought it to the baker. He puts it in the oven for you. So now, because there's no difficulty, so then we don't have the leniency of paspalter. What we have to do is make sure that bread is Pas Yisrael, right? We were lenient, and I'll explain it again. We were lenient previously because bread is so important. But if the Jewish person is able to make their own dough, so they're able to do most of the hard work of the bread. So now we don't rely on the leniency. Now, of course, today people don't bring their bread to the bakery. They probably get the bakery closed down if they were taking other people's bread and put it in there, right? The health authorities would be all over them. So is this matter even relevant? Probably not, but it helps us understand a little bit better the nuances of the halacha. Okay, short class today. We will continue, please God, tomorrow. And if you have any questions, let us know. Everybody have an awesome